So again, good morning, everybody. I know we have a lot of people on the call, and time is precious, so my apologies for some of the technical issues, but let's go ahead and get into this. And again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today and learn about the updates that will be coming out with CompareMaine version 7.0. Just a couple of reminders as we get started. If you do need to mute your phone, please mute it. Don't put it on hold. Otherwise, we'll all get to listen to some beautiful music. And there's a chat feature in the webinar, so if you have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to post those, and we'll address at the end of the webinar as many questions as we can. And for those questions that we either don't know the answer for or we can't get to, in the interest of time, we'll follow up with the group in writing. So with that said, let's jump into the agenda. I'm going to just spend a few minutes talking about the background of CompareMaine and just sort of level setting, and then we'll talk about updates based on feedback to date. We'll review the methodology that we're using to calculate costs for surgical procedures, then review the timeline for the release of CompareMaine 7.0, and then end with answering any specific questions that you all have. So just as a reminder, the next slide, the background on CompareMaine. The Maine Health Data Organization, in collaboration with the Maine Quality Forum, are required by law to promote the transparency of healthcare costs and quality information on a publicly accessible website, and we are required to display that information at the individual procedure level, by facility, by health plan. The first version of CompareMaine was launched in October of 2015. And we are required by law to update the cost and quality data 2 times a year, and our next update is scheduled for release in May of this year. CompareMaine reports on 233 healthcare procedures from 272 facilities. And that number, you know, I suspect will continue to grow. We continue to get questions and pressure from folks to add more procedures to the site, so more to come on that. We've had, since we've launched the site, over 55,000 users have visited CompareMaine with over 437,000 page views. The top 10 procedures that people are looking at are listed on the slide. I won't read them all. I don't think, it probably doesn't surprise you what the top 10 are, and I think this list has been pretty consistent for the last year or so in terms of what people are searching when they're coming to the site. The next slide, we are adding 3 quality updates to the site with this May release, and they're listed below: preventing falls with injury, preventing pressure ulcers, and unplanned hospital-wide readmissions. One of the requests that we've received from not just our consumer advisory group, but from legislators, is to add more quality data to the site. So we've been working on a strategy, a short-term strategy, and then a longer-term strategy to bring more quality measures into the site. And this is part of that strategy with the release of these 3 new measures in May. In terms of the updates around the cost estimates will now reflect the time period July 1, 2017 through June 30 of 2018. We've added the procedure 80053, which is the comprehensive metabolic panel. We've added cost estimates for 4 common infusion therapy services, and you'll see those listed below, and they will be reported by setting. And we have moved to a new episode grouper software, which is the ETG, or the Episode Treatment Groups software. And again, that's the tool we're using to calculate the 10 surgical procedures that we have up on the site. And we're going to get into that in much more detail as soon as I turn this over. So just quickly as a reminder, when we first launched CompareMaine and through version 5.0, we were using the medical episode grouper, which has been created by Truven Analytics, and that's the grouper that we were using to calculate the cost for the 10 surgical procedures. We then took a pause with release 6.0, and we did not update the cost for those 10 surgical procedures because there was an issue with the cost of accessing the MEG, and it was way outside of our budget. So the MHDO board agreed that we needed to find an alternative. And so that's what we've been working on, is looking for a new episode grouper. And I think, you know, the good news is we found Optum's Symmetry Episode Treatment Grouper to be one that works within our budget and works within our system, and is one that I think many people are much more familiar with than the MEG. So there's a lot of good things about the ETG, and I think what you'll see for the most part, although these are different tools, at the end of the day, the differences in the cost estimates for the surgical procedures are not, we don't see huge significant differences that would raise red flags. So we were happy about that. So with that, I'm going to turn the rest of the presentation over to Leanne Candora, who is the lead on working with us from Human Service Research Institute. She'll walk you through the remainder of the presentation. And again, as you have questions, please post them, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So with that, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Karen Lee. So the next section of the presentation really just highlights some information about the episode grouper itself, and then how we're using it to create the estimates for the surgical procedures on CompareMaine. What you'll notice throughout the presentation is that the process has been very similar to how we had used the MEG grouper to construct the estimates that have been used on prior releases of CompareMaine, and that really we're hoping that the explanation that we go through today is just helpful in understanding that process and what we use to generate those estimates. Now, I understand that there's probably a number of you on the call today who won't necessarily have procedures that meet the criteria, those 10 surgical estimates. And so we've continued to use the same methodology for the other 223 procedures that are on CompareMaine for to produce those cost estimates. So we're really only talking about the surgical procedures, and at this point, it is the 10 that I will review as part of this presentation. So the first couple slides are just a high-level background on episode of care groupers in general. This is probably very familiar to most of you on today's call, but we just wanted to sort of lay the groundwork. So the methods and benefits of using an episode of care grouper. So it is a software that we have installed to organize claims into episodes of care. So that's a set of services provided to treat a clinical condition or procedure, which then allows us to create a bundle payment, and that is what we then use to estimate the cost. These bundle payments show the cost over the course of an episode of care instead of each service individually, and they can provide a more comprehensive representation of healthcare costs that a patient may occur. So, as Karen Lee mentioned, we have now shifted to Optum Symmetry's ETG, the Episode Treatment Group. So the ETG is an episode grouper for medical and pharmacy claims, and it contains a condition classification methodology that combines related services into medically relevant and distinct units as a way to describe episodes of care and associated costs. And I'll get a little more into what that means for how we then use those groupings to create our estimates. So as a reminder, these are the current 10 procedures that are on CompareMaine using this grouping methodology. Everything from colonoscopies to shoulder arthroscopy. So as you can see, what we're showing in the table here is a list of those 10 procedures with a lead CPT code, and then other codes of interest that we also take in consideration when looking at things like, for the first example, colonoscopies with a biopsy. So the first two procedures are colonoscopies, and we estimate costs for a one-day episode. The remainder of the 8 procedures are more surgical in nature, and we do look at a 60-day episode length, so that would be 30 days before and 30 days after the surgery itself, and that would be all related services to the surgery would be considered as part of the episode. And so this is just a little more of a description. So as I mentioned, the colonoscopies are the one-day episode of care, and the estimates include the related services during that one day, for example, surgeon's fees or anesthesia. And all the other procedures are the 60-day episodes, which are the related services 30 days before and after. That could include pre- and post-op appointments, physical therapy, and anesthesia. So these services, so the services provided in these estimates could be at a variety of settings by a variety of doctors, but they're all related to the surgery itself. So then this just provides a little more in-depth description about how we actually then use the ETG to produce the estimates. So first we look to a period of time for this estimate, for this update for CompareMaine 7, the period of interest is July 2017 through June 2018. That's the most recent 1 year of full APCD or All Payer Claims Database data that we have that we're using for this update. But in order to run the ETG, we look at a longer period of time to ensure that the software has access to the patient's full claim history to accurately group the claim lines within the episodes, and then to be able to assign the accurate treatment indicators and condition codes, as well as severity levels. So we look at a longer period of time to make sure we have the full history. But then when we produce the estimates that appear in CompareMaine, we take the ETG output file and associate it with the episodes with claim lines with service dates from July 1st, 2017 to June 2018. And that period is evaluated for the presence of the codes of interest. And as a reminder, the codes of interest were the ones that were on this previous slide for each of the different surgical procedures. So this slide just talks a little more about what the ETG does. So what we want to make sure that costs are comparable that we show on CompareMaine. We realize that, you know, different patients come in with different backgrounds and different conditions. And so to ensure comparable cost, each complex procedure has a set of primary and secondary treatment indicator codes. And to be included, an ETG episode must have at least one of the primary treatment indicator codes so to be included in our cost estimates. And then we also look at the ETG base classes, which is a set of more than 500 clinically determined classes that each represent an underlying disease or condition. And then we use that to identify common diseases and conditions that then would allow us to compare similar patients across facilities. And this really brings us back to, you know, the point of the cost estimates for CompareMaine are so you can look across facilities, and we only want to be selecting cases for the surgical procedures that would be comparable across the facility. And so the base classes and the treatment indicator codes helps us with the selection of those episodes. So finally, once an ETG episode is selected for inclusion, so it met the criteria that we discussed on the previous slide, we selected comparable classes of interest and codes of interest. We take the cost estimate and process it using the same methodology for the complex procedures that we use with the MEG. So we report on the main procedure and all related procedures or services that took place 30 days before and 30 days after. And then we also then exclude claims from public payers like Medicare and Medicaid. And we exclude claims from patients 65 and older, and we exclude episodes that lack both a facility and professional component. And so some of these criteria are the same criteria that have to be met by all of the estimates that we show on CompareMaine. And for the most part, as we described, it's really commercially insured consumers who are less than 65 of age 65. And then finally, what we do to attribute the episodes to providers is that we use a provider attribution logic to assign each episode to a single facility group based on the billing. And so, for example, we want to make sure that the episode for surgery is getting assigned to the facility where the surgery actually took place, who billed for that surgical cost. So when more than one CompareMaine facility is identified, the facility with the highest billing amount is assigned to episode. And then finally, the median cost by facility are calculated and displayed on the website. And just as a reminder, to protect patient privacy, we do not report on the facility's costs for a procedure that has fewer than 5 claims that we're able to identify. So this could either be at the facility procedure level, where we can, at the facility, there's more than 5 claims, but if you select a specific insurer, we show options to select by 5 different insurers, such as Aetna or Harvard Pilgrim. Each of that selection criteria must at least have 5 claims for us to display the median cost. And so before jumping into the timeline, just to follow up on a comment that Karen Lee made earlier, when we did calculate this newest round of cost estimates using the new grouper, we were seeing costs pretty much in line with how we were using the methodology when we had the MEG. So obviously, we're ready. We have the review period, so all facilities can take a look at their estimates, and we're really happy to answer any questions that come up, but we're hoping that that's in line with what you're used to seeing for the different surgical episodes as we presented with the last update. So this is just a reminder of the timeline for the CompareMaine launch. So March 19th, which is today, this is the webinar to review the new grouper software. This Thursday, we'll open the facility and payer review period. And as a reminder, probably many of you have been involved in past review periods. You will receive an email with a link to the development site that includes the updated estimates for CompareMaine 7.0, and so you can log in and see those estimates. And payers will also receive a spreadsheet where we conduct an outlier analysis, and they will look at all the estimates where their payer estimates were flagged as outliers. So they will also get that as part of the review process. We've extended the review period out a little bit because we know using this new methodology, we want to make sure there's enough time for questions to be answered if facilities or payers have those questions. So the period is from March 21st to April 10th. We will be responding to questions throughout that period, and have until April 24th that we're going to be working with payers and facilities to respond to any questions and concerns. And then the goal is that in early May, we will be able to publicly launch the CompareMaine 7.0 update. And that after that, if there was issues that weren't able to be responded to during the review period before the launch, that we'll continue to work with any providers or facilities to resolve any outstanding questions. So that was really it for my part. Karen Lee, is there anything you wanted to add before we move on to some of the questions and comments that have come in?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Now I am just gonna, let's take a look. So the only question that I'm seeing so far was, would it be possible to get a copy of the presentation? Absolutely, we can make this available, and we usually make available a recording of this presentation. So you can have both a copy of the presentation itself, and we'll post the video recording, and we'll send a note to all facilities and payers. Not seeing any more comments posted. I guess we can open it up if people do want to ask questions. We certainly have time.
So, does anybody have any questions, comments?
Yes, this is Murgisette from Reddington Fairview.
Good morning.
Good morning. If I understand this correctly, a surgical procedure that's done at a hospital, this cost will show services that were rendered perhaps by other providers 30 days before and 30 days after.
Correct. It will be bundled into the cost that shows under the facility where the procedure took place.
Okay, thanks.
And that is consistent with the way we've been showing these surgical procedures since we started using the MEG, which goes back to the early days. So that's not any different. What may be a little bit different are some of the procedures that this grouper would pull in as part of that bundle. Versus what the MEG may have pulled in as part of that bundle. But again, looking at how the costs kind of compare, even though, as Leanne said, there are two different methodologies, but kind of looking at what the costs were under the old and what it looks like under the ETG, directionally it looks, you know, I don't think you're going to be surprised by any of the estimates. Are there any other questions?
Yes. Good morning. This is Nick Bellet with CompareMaine Healthcare. This is my first time being involved in this review and in this process. So what is the process, generally speaking, for if I see something that doesn't look quite right?
Leanne, can you?
Yeah,
yes,
no
please.
problem. So depending on your question, so usually, you know, the first is really helping users understand, or payers or facilities understand the methodology, because a lot of times that will answer the question they have about how the costs were constructed. We also, if there is more questions about what went into a particular episode, we have worked with various facilities and payers to provide the claim line detail that backs up the estimate that appears on the website, and obviously that would be shared through a secure sharing mechanism. That they would be sensitive data, but they would be the claims that we would use to construct the episode. But for the most part, what we've experienced is being able to answer questions about the methodology helps the facility or payer understand went into the cost estimate. But we're open throughout the period or whenever there are questions, even if it's not a review period, if you have questions about your facilities costs, please feel free to contact us. As you can see on the screen now, that's the email that is used for CompareMaine specifically, and we would be happy to work with you to help explain.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, just one last reminder, we will be getting the demo site out to you all. And as Leanne just underscored, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to contact us. The CompareMaine address is listed in the deck. I think some of you have used this in the past. You can always reach out to me. But, our goal is when we launch this, that we have clarified, answered, resolved any outstanding questions or issues before the launch. And we work really hard at doing that. So, don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. And we're really excited about the fact that we're releasing version 7.0. And thanks to many of you who have helped to make this site better. From our initial launch to where we are now, I'm just going to take a minute to brag. We have received national recognition, and there are lots of other states across the country that want to build something like CompareMaine, and they're very interested in how we work with you all to validate the data and the information. And I believe, as does the MHDO Board of Directors, that your review of this information is critically important in maintaining the credibility of the site. So thank you for taking the time to be on this call today. Thank you in advance for taking the time to review the information and to follow up with us with any questions. And with that, I'm happy to say I think we're way ahead of schedule. We'll let you all go and get on with your day. And again, thanks everybody.